and official welcome, everybody. This will be a very open and free flow conversation on the topic of talent acquisition, especially what it means to do talent acquisition work in highly culturally diverse environments. Um, this is the second event of Hacking HR Luxembourg. For those of you who join for the first time a Hacking HR event, we are a global community of what we call ourselves like-minded and like-hearted professionals. And our mission is to create the best HR and the best world of work possible, where people can enjoy and thrive and make great things together. The topic for today, as we mentioned, is talent acquisition challenges from scarcity of talent to diversity of cultures. It is a great joy to share the event of today backstage, but also on screen with Bianca. If you would like to say a few words about yourself.
Yes, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy. As some of you may know, I'm a very curious person and very passionate about talent acquisition in itself. I have been working with it for more than 8 years now, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Luxembourg. And what really my vocation is, it's to connect with people and help them to connect to each other. So this is translate everything that I believe and everything that I try to do. So doing that, hacking HR for me, it's a way of connecting even more with people from over the world, like Janie in Cape Town, and I'm really happy to be here. Now I'm, besides of connecting with people, I also work at Badenoch and Clark, recruiting unicorns for IT. So this is my fun daily tasks, let's say, and I'm really thrilled to hear all those experience that you can share with us today.
Thank you very much, Bianca. It's a pleasure having you here. And I do have experience within the world of HR. In regards to talent acquisition, my experience leans slightly towards being the candidate within this process. And I will just start by introducing the speakers. Just to be objective, I will introduce you as you are on the banner. So let's make it easy. So first off, we have Emily Bavon. If you can just wave so people can see you. It's difficult with Zoom. So,
good afternoon, everyone.
Emily, she sent us her bio. She studied history and communication before joining the human resources world by accident. It's been 13 years and no regrets. She's been honing her skills in talent acquisition and its challenges every day. She says she's lucky to have lived across East Africa and Europe and to have worked in telecom, construction, external recruitment, and IT. She's also a vegetarian foodie, animal lover, and an avid traveler and reader. So thank you, Emily, and good to have you here today with us.
Thank you, Minola.
Moving on to Darren Robinson. He doesn't believe in you only live once. He says that if you've lived and worked in different countries, the experience gives you another life. Born in Royal Leamington Spa in the UK, he worked in London, Sydney, Australia, and in Luxembourg for the past 15 years. Previously, he served in an elite regiment for the British Army, which gave him the foundations for endurance and ambition. Working in the recruitment industry for 24 years across continents and managing several countries. In the last year, he became an entrepreneur with his own recruitment firm. He's married and has an 11-year-old son who he loves to watch playing football. He loves Spain. He's a sci-fi addict and fan of gin with over 50 different bottles at home. Thank you, Darren.
I'm glad you didn't get the addict of gin and the sci-fi mixed up.
No, I practiced reading the bios before. Okay, next on our bios list, we have Jane Moores. Jane is joining us from Cape Town, and here is the lovely presentation that she sent us. Respected as a champion for human connection, Jane leaves her mark with hiring managers and talent acquisition specialists through engaging and interactive recruitment training and career coaching. Leveraging over 20 years experience in the recruitment industry, Jane's exposure as area manager for a national consultancy, owner of her own agency, and consultant to internal corporate TA teams, has enabled her to train and coach global players to use a fair and accurate interview approach and create a magnetic candidate experience that boosts their brand. And here is what I particularly liked. She feels lucky that she has never felt deprived during the South Africa alcohol bans this year because her love for chocolate far outweighs her taste for wine.
So there we go, Darren. I don't have 50 bottles of gin, but I might have 50 bars of chocolates.
I already see some chemistry building among our speakers. This is great. Okay, next up is Magnus Oclunge. I hope I pronounced it correctly, Magnus.
Close.
Close. Thank you. After 15 years in professional football in the UK, Magnus says, I decided I wanted to have a complete shift away from the game that gave me so much joy and happiness. And here I am today, married with 2 beautiful kids, enjoying a second career where I get to impact people's lives and meet amazing HR and transformation professionals across Europe. We are very happy to have you with us, Magnus.
Thank you.
And I believe we came to our last speaker on the banner today. So we have Miguel Pinero. Hi, Miguel.
Hi, how are you?
A passionate organizational psychologist, a true defender of optimal relationships between workplace and employees. Research-driven, convinced professional of the power of systematic knowledge and an empathetic, ethical human overall. Always speaking, hunting new experiences, and never quiet. And here is something that I absolutely loved when I saw his bio. Don't hold back from inviting me for dinner. So thank you very much for having an early dinner with us today. We are very happy you accepted our invitation.
Thanks to you, Manola.
And we can start with the event. We will slowly ease into the topic. And I would ask each of you to tell us what specific talent acquisition challenges have you identified working in culturally diverse environments? And I will prompt you as you are on my screen for a little bit of diversity. Jane, would you like to kick it off, please?
Yes, I would love to. I was just wrenching myself back from my chat with Alison, where she's offering to exchange Belgian chocolate for South African wine. So I'm happy to get the chocolate and get rid of the wine. Thank you, Alison. But back to our topic, so we don't linger on chocolate and wine too long. So you're asking about the talent acquisition challenges that we found in culturally diverse markets. And I think South Africa is definitely one of those countries that has a highly culturally diverse market. Apart from our 11 official official languages, so I don't know if anyone else has 11 official languages in their country. We have a range of different people with different backgrounds, not all of them indigenous to South Africa. But I think one of our biggest challenges that we've seen is this kind of fight between skills and diversity. Because we've got a very shameful, that's the only way I can explain it, shameful history in treating different races unfairly. We didn't create opportunity for all races to be able to upskill themselves and get the qualifications that they needed and the depth of experience that they needed. And so thankfully, we were able to change that about 25 years ago. So we're very grateful. But still, there is that ripple effect. And so even as companies have been trying to become more diverse, it's been a challenge because they've sometimes had to think, okay, what am I going to opt for? Am I going to opt for the person who's going to give me diversity? Or am I going to opt for the person who has more skills and qualification? And I know that they'll hit the ground running. So there's been that kind of tension in most companies and in most people who are trying to hire for companies where they've had to make that choice. So I think that's been one of our challenges. Another challenge that we've seen is that sometimes there's been an assumption that diversity is linked to race predominantly. Instead of seeing that even in South Africa, where people look like they're from the same race, they might have a very opposing culture. For example, and I'm sure I won't get the clicks right, the Xhosa and the Zulu, for example, would be two people who from the outside might look like they're the same race, but there's actually, could be quite a bit of tension and differentiation between those cultures. So I think there's those that have been something to deal with. I think also people, how they classify themselves, because in South Africa, with our with our laws being set up so that we give preference to previously disadvantaged candidates, people can have a choice almost, where one parent is of one race and another parent is another race, to decide which race they want to be. So they may look more of one race, but classify themselves as more of another race. So there's that challenge. And then I think there's also the foreign challenge that we have, where we have people who are foreign and who would bring diversity to an organization, but because they wouldn't give a company points in terms of their equity plans in connection with our legislation, they aren't always included. So those are just a few of the challenges that we have here in South Africa, but I would love to hear about the challenges that people in other places of the world are experiencing.
Thank you very, very much, Jane. We will still keep the conversation outside Luxembourg for Magnus to share his experience from recruiting within the UK.
Yeah, thank you. And well said, Jane, and I can certainly find some similarities in terms of some of the things you're saying. So I live in London. I grew up in London. So London as a city, if you like, is extremely multicultural from a race perspective. So in terms of kind of diversity and inclusion, you would expect that kind of most companies are getting that piece right, if you like, certainly here in London. But I think the challenge is that there are so many kind of different cultures and backgrounds, and there are a lot of people who kind of migrate to immigrate, sorry, should I say, to England and come and kind of live in London, and there's not necessarily the visibility for the opportunities, certainly within the kind of corporate space that I kind of typically recruit for. And one of the challenges I've found from a kind of client perspective is kind of having those, getting people comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations around diversity. That's something I think people potentially kind of find quite difficult. I think straight away there is some insecurity around it. And I think what I always try and point out is that just because we're having this conversation, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It's more of an education piece for both parties to kind of understand what we can do better, so to speak. And I think another challenge that I would say I face is the data. And listen, data is important, and everything by and large has to be measured by metrics, especially when you're talking about massive kind of organizations or even small organizations. You will always kind of revert to the data. And I guess the challenge, or how I kind of challenge people that I'm working with at the moment certainly is, can we look beyond the data and just look at it from a human perspective and say, is there enough representation from X? And could there be more? What could we do? why have you not been able to retain a certain type or people from a certain background within your organisation? And I think there's a lot of work being done in terms of attracting diversity, but I don't think there's necessarily a lot being done in terms of why you haven't been able to kind of, number one, attract diverse people from diverse backgrounds in the past, and number two, being able to keep them once you do have them. So those are the challenges that I would kind of be passionate about talking about.
Thank you so very much, Magnus. Thank you. And now, Darren, you're the first one to bring the conversation to Luxembourg, because this is Hacking HR Luxembourg, but we're very happy to see that we are Hacking HR Luxembourg and friends.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I think I should clarify, this is water, judging by my introduction on gin. Yeah. For now, maybe I'll change it to gin a little bit later. Yeah, Luxembourg is, of course, it's a culturally diverse country in itself. Since I've been here 15 years, the population's grown by 40%. If you look at the world's population, it's grown by 20% in the same time. So we have about 1,000 foreigners, and I'm a foreigner, we have 1,000 foreigners come to live and work in the country every month. Now, that's huge for a country that's only 630,000 people. So growing substantially, 170 nationalities plus. So, and again, it's already quite a diverse and cultural country. And I think I was on a diversity panel yesterday because it was Diversity Day in Luxembourg. And I was asked to join a panel for a client. And it was really interesting because they asked a Luxembourger, yes, they do exist, and they asked this Luxembourger, well, how have you, who hasn't worked or lived anywhere but Luxembourg, how have you managed to be culturally diverse? And I loved his answer. He basically said, look, I haven't worked anywhere else. I haven't lived anywhere else around the world. The world came to me. Yeah, and I just love that because that's Luxembourg. The world comes to Luxembourg. So with challenges, I think that there isn't necessarily the challenges of a day-to-day attracting a diverse population because they're there already. And I think what's helped is there's been a talent shortage in Luxembourg for quite a number of years. And as a result of that, people haven't had the luxury of rejecting certain cultures or certain races or nationalities. So they've basically had to hire on skills and character and competence. So I think that's really helped with diversity. One of the challenges I do see is we don't see enough diversity in the boardroom yet. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Darren. Thank you. Quite powerful statements. The world came to Luxembourg and not enough diversity in the boardroom. It also echoes something that we've heard during several conversations, that Luxembourg is naturally diverse, but not yet enough intentionally inclusive. So moving on to Emily.
Yes, thank you. So talking also about Luxembourg, since I've been back for 4 years now, so I could compare also with other markets where I've been working before. And I think there is sometimes a misconception about Luxembourg for people from other European countries. We always have a lot of candidates who are willing to relocate to Luxembourg because they see it a bit like an El Dorado. And they think it's perfect, high salaries, great quality of life, good job market, you can find a job easily. And it's not always true depending on your profile, your experience. So I think it's important talking with prospective candidates who are considering Luxembourg as a next place of living, to be transparent and explain the reality and what are the challenges they may face. So that's something I always try to do. If I find candidates have very high expectations, I'm trying to bring them back to earth and say, yes, indeed, salaries are good, but cost of living is high. And maybe in your field, there are not that many opportunities as there would be for a finance professional. So we have to fight this image that Luxembourg can have in some other countries, to try and give a really accurate picture and try to adapt to each person based on their experience and what they're looking for.
Thank you very much, Emily. Very great point on transparency and expectations management. And Miguel, it's up to you to give yet another perspective on Luxembourg.
So thank you very much, Minola. I wanted to say something when I prepared for the questions for this question, but when Jane started speaking, I think she totally dwarfed anything that we could say about ages of diversity when it comes to talent acquisition, right? I mean, like I was gonna talk like Luxembourg and its variety, and then you started with these linkages that exist between the law and the market that happen in South Africa, and you know we cannot say anything too much. Nevertheless, we do have a reality in South Africa. The diversity was there, but it was somewhat hidden. In Luxembourg, the diversity did not exist, as Darren was saying, and we had to create it. So we cannot escape from it. It's present every time. So I'm gonna go directly to one point that I think has not been mentioned, just to nurture a little bit more what we've been speaking. And in the creation of the diversity that we have in the Luxembourgish market, I think that one of the main points is understanding each other. By understanding each other is the fact that we do have people that comes from outside, and we have to do two things. The first one is we might speak a lingua franca between all of us, but that does not necessarily mean that we're speaking exactly the same intentions. And two, we need to understand what are the practices of people. So it's difficult, I think, to detach what the real skills of the people with their common practices. So is it because they're considered the interviews something so formal as we don't do a bad thing for the candidate? Is it because the candidate does not send cover letters all the time because it's not a common practice in their country, something that is a bad thing for the selection process? Is it because the candidate does not dress properly or super formally for any of the interviews, a bad thing or a good thing? So I think one of our exercises is detaching all of the common cultural practices and really focusing in the skills of the candidate and the capacity of that candidate to match the position.
Excellent. So thank you all for your point of views on that question. Our discussion today is about talent acquisition and scarcity of talent together with the diversity challenge. And then to tackle the scarcity part of talent acquisition, what innovative solutions have you found to tackle talent shortage?
Miguel, you go first this time.
I go first this time.
I don't want you feeling dwarfed.
Okay.
I think it's just your empathy. That's why you feel that way.
Thank you very much. Well, look, I don't want to sound like as I'm bragging about the answer, but for example, in my company, we are in a very small niche of technology in a very specific area. So we do leave this talent shortage situation every day. Now, how do we tackle it? Well, there's the millenary answer, and that's been with training. So I don't know if that's innovative as an answer of what you're looking for, but the reality is that what can we do when we don't have these people, when these people, the industry that we're working on doesn't even exist? So probably not even us know exactly what it is that we're expecting from candidates, or how should these candidates be, or how proficient they can be for the positions. So in the end, we just had to resort to take the people on board that we believe are the best ones or the most similar to what could be suiting the position. And then once they're in, trying to train these people up to the skills and to the levels that we expect from them. And some people might see it terrible, the lack of the talent shortage, but sorry, the talent shortage per se. But me particularly, I have seen that it also has very good sides in terms of learning. The company learns from new perspectives, and at the same time, the candidates do appreciate a lot that a company is investing in them because they themselves are not at the level that is expected. So that's, I'm sorry if it's not innovative, but I think that that's like the proper answer, training.
Yeah. Okay. And you, Emily? Do you agree?
Well, I think you face the same challenges as I do, because we both recruit IT profiles, and it's quite well known that in Luxembourg there is a shortage of IT professionals. So, well, like Miguel said, probably not the most innovative answer, but I think we have to open our perspectives and be more open to have people relocate to Luxembourg. Companies have to be more flexible on providing work permits for professionals when they are looking for a very niche competence. For some profiles, maybe they can have the luxury of saying, no, we want like the perfect candidate who is already in Luxembourg, who doesn't need a work permit, who has this experience, this one. For some profiles in IT, you need to look for the right skills, the right attitude, and be more open regarding location, work permits, and everything. So that's really something I'm trying to bring in my company, that, okay, maybe this person will need a work permit, but it's not a big deal. I mean, there's no cost in Luxembourg for work permits. It's mainly paperwork. So why not? Let's give these people a chance. And also in Luxembourg, you have a lot of very good professionals who relocated with their spouses or partners. And these people, they arrive on the market and they have great experiences in their home country. And here's the struggle to find a job because maybe they don't speak French, or maybe they don't have the local experience. And I think we really need to give this pool of candidates a chance. It's now a huge pool of candidates because companies like Amazon are bringing many people from India, for instance, and these people relocate with their families, and their partners are struggling to find jobs. And it seems very unfair that they don't get more opportunities. So that would be my solution, let's say.
Yeah, it's doesn't seem very innovative, but the ones who lives here and work in Luxembourg knows that it is innovative. Companies that are willing to pass the work permit process, which is not very difficult, but this is not very usual here in the country. So I agree with you, Emily. It's a good challenge.
Can I ask a question, Emily?
Yes.
I mean, so many people have been speaking about during this COVID time, especially around remote work, which has already been there in the IT world, but has stepped up even more. And I'm just wondering how remote work has impacted the need for people to get work permits, as opposed to just work in those IT roles remotely?
Well, if your employees are working from home from a different country, you have some impact on taxes. So it's another specificity of Luxembourg. You know, we have a lot of people who are commuting from neighboring countries, for instance, even not talking about countries far away, but even France, Belgium, Germany. So in many companies, you have people who actually do not live in Luxembourg. They work in Luxembourg, but they go home every night in France, Germany, or Belgium. And before there was a limited number of days where you could work outside of Luxembourg. If you were going beyond this number of days, then you would be taxed as per the tax scheme of your residence country, not Luxembourg. And Luxembourg tax scheme is much more beneficial in most cases. This has been put on hold during lockdown and COVID until end of the year. So for now, people who are cross-border workers can work from home without a limit until 31st of December. Then we'll see afterwards what's going on. So it made work from home very easy, and I'm glad that governments could agree on this. But that's a very specific aspect of working in Luxembourg that can also impact recruitment, because depending on where your offices are located, you might lose good candidates because they will tell you, oh, you're there, oh, that's too far for me to commute. I prefer to work in Luxembourg City, or I prefer to work close to the airport. So this is also a criteria that we need to take into consideration, and it's very specific to us.
Interesting, thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And you, Magnus, how do you see that in London as well, and with your whole experience?
Yeah, no problem. So I recruit for HR and HR transformation, business transformation, like Manola said at the start. And I guess again, kind of going back to the London market, it is pretty open, if you like, to people kind of coming from different cultures and different backgrounds. So I guess where I would say we're kind of having to come up with different methods and ways of kind of finding and unlocking talent. So it kind of goes back to what Darren said about English people usually typically only speaking English. But a lot of these kind of HR and transformation roles will require someone to have that real kind of global remit and some kind of niche skill set. So that's where it now becomes quite difficult, because you're looking for someone who can speak different languages, and straight away you're kind of picking from a real small pool of talent, if you like. So what we've done where that's concerned, so HR people and transformation people are typically kind of people's people. They're happy to kind of do events like this and have conversations, go to networking events and meet new people. So what we've done over the course of a year, we've got like a sister company that's attached to our company that kind of put on events similar to Hacking HR, but it will be for real niche skill sets where, I don't know, you could be talking about kind of all design or some kind of HR information system implementation, a specific system, and wherever it will be, you'll kind of put on events, make sure it's kind of well publicized, and just continue to organically kind of grow that network. So then you've kind of got passive talent as well as a pool of active talent to kind of pick from as and when these assignments and mandates come about. So that's certainly a way we kind of go about things as a company.
Thank you so very much, Magnus. I've remembered several conversations lately within the recruitment environment where we talked a lot about safe recruitment and meaningful recruitment. Safe recruitment meaning having a checklist from a hiring manager that says, down to the languages that you need to speak. And I don't want to single out French by any means, because it also applies, for example, to English speakers or German speakers. Or they also, have a checklist regarding visa and all those constraints that you talk about in the chat. Whereas there is a need to move to meaningful recruitment, meaning recruiters who understand the business and who understand the business needs that they are trying to address through the candidates that they want to bring in the company. It also ties in with something that was mentioned during our last event regarding recruiting for culture ed, not for culture fit. And if you would like to say something, Darren, along these lines, and if there is any room for innovation to bridge this gap.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm speaking for Luxembourg, I suppose, which it can be quite difficult because we have some very specific needs. So in financial services, it's a little bit different to the IT sector, because I think it's a luxury problem you guys have, because you can really go all over the world to look for IT professionals. The challenge you have is getting the work permit and the visas, I understand that. But in finance, the challenge we have is we need people with Luxembourg experience, because if it's a risk professional, they need to have a relationship with a regulator. If it's an accountant, people prefer to have Lux GAAP. So we're quite limited. And then it goes to the stage where, we're looking for, let's say, business developers for the Nordic market. Now, that's going to be quite difficult to find, to create some diversity in other nationalities other than people from the Nordics. It's a similar when we're asked for German speakers. Where do we get German speakers from? It certainly isn't going to be France or further afield. It's going to be Germany on most of the occasions. So we don't get that option to, let's say, create that diverse environment. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Okay, Jen, do you want to share your opinion also on this topic?
Sure. I mean, it's around the kind of innovative solutions.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, again, we have maybe a different market, because a lot of our problem in South Africa is high unemployment, and people, we have a skills or talent shortage because there aren't enough people who maybe have the skills or qualifications. So for us, it's not just a challenge at a higher level. It's just in hiring people in general, you know, getting people upskilled in general. And I think, so there's two ways I think we've addressed this. One is organizations that create work readiness for people who have very little experience, for the youth who have been marginalized from the workforce. So there, for example, there's an organization called Harambee, who started off by creating a 2 to 3 month work readiness program. And then companies would pay, much like a recruitment agency, 10 to 15,000 rands, which is very small if you convert it to any of your currencies, but for that person. So I think that's one. But I think what people have been saying would be more innovative is not to just have corporates almost funding the training of candidates, but also outsourcing their own skills. So people in corporates who have skills going out and training people and equipping them that way, and not just doing it from a funding perspective. And then I think on the other hand, where you have people who are at a higher level and you have companies wanting to target those scarce skills, they've seen that they need to start really recruiting for the future with those people, because they want to build relationships with them. So when the role is open, it's an easier flow for that person to connect with them. So they've not just been building internal pipelines, but external pipelines, which again, I don't know how innovative that is globally, because we were kind of, you know, following other European countries in doing that. But for example, HR people, you know, one of my friends who is in HR for one of our retail companies, she got to a point where they were kind of held to having to have at least 2 to 3 coffee dates or meetings with people who they did not want to employ now, but a couple of years from that time. So it was about investing in the talent pool of the future by building relationships now, so that that connection was there and that transition would be smoother later on.
Great point. Thank you, Jane, for adding this perspective to us. All of us as HR talent acquisition professionals, we see that diversity and inclusion is a big challenge for us. What are your mechanisms that you use to identify and address unconscious bias within the talent acquisition team that you're part? For example, Emily, could you tell us what is your strategy?
Well, first I try to identify my own biases because we all have some. And particularly when you start recruiting on a new market, it's really important to understand the culture of the market you operate in, so you can get rid of your bias. If you don't understand the market where you work, then you will not be able to do a good job. And I'm lucky to work a lot with the Philippines. I have my team in Manila. And I went there last year before we were banned from traveling, and it was really important for me to go there, because remotely it's hard to take the grip on the specificities of a culture, and some little things that might seem weird to you from a distance, once you get to the country, it all makes sense. So the first thing I do is try to really understand the culture, either the culture of the candidate I'm talking to or the culture of the country where I'm operating. That's my little tip.
Good. And you, Miguel, as also an internal recruiter, what you can share?
First of all, well, I broke down that answer into 4 points. The first one, I totally resonate with Emily. The first job is to be done internally to understand how do we deal with differences of people that we have in front of us, because we all have them to certain different situations. Even if we don't have them, then why don't we have them, right? But this is the first thing. The second thing is we care about conversion metrics down the pipeline, and how many people goes up and how many people goes down, and how many times do we need to do one step and to do the other step. But what about the people that we're moving forward? What about the sexes? What about the ages? What about the nationalities? So it's not only the rates of success of those KPIs, but also the demographics of the people that we're putting forward inside our company. The third one, I would totally say that in a process that is not just single-handed by one person, but by several, but different actors, then definitely there has to be a training in there so that you can recognize which people is being a bottleneck for which kind of conditions of humans and of candidates inside the companies. And then the final one, I'm gonna say it on purpose in the last decision, in almost in a mocky way, but it's, you know, the diversity policy. Because the diversity policy is an instrument that we all have to draft, but in the end, if we don't check everything else, the diversity policy can just be there as something to, well, be there in your shelf as something that you have drafted. But if you don't practice it, then we have to do it, but it's gonna be senseless. It wouldn't have all the other work done.
Excellent. And you, Magnus, as an external recruitment, how you deal with unconscious bias in your daily work and your recruitments?
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's good to hear the perspective of Emily and Miguel, who are both internal, because yeah, I guess it is a completely different process, I guess, for an external person, because we're not necessarily involved in the kind of strategic element of it, if you like. We're given a mandate and we have to kind of go and try and deliver on that mandate. So I guess one of the mechanisms that we've tried to use, or certainly one of the challenges, should I say, that we've got forth to clients, and in quite a subtle way, is just kind of asking things like if we can kind of take names off CVs. Now you'll be amazed. There are a lot of companies who are really kind of open to that at this point, because like Emily said, there are always some kind of level of subconscious bias. But I think just something as simple as kind of removing names from CVs, which allows you to just kind of focus in on skill set and skill set only, I think straight away that kind of opens up the amount of kind of diversity that you end up kind of recruiting into your business, the amount of diversity that you kind of end up interviewing. And then that may kind of go a long way to just changing some of the subconscious bias views that people internally kind of have of the people that they're kind of typically going after to try and hire. But again, really interesting to hear the kind of strategic element, if you like, that Emily and Miguel touched upon, being internal recruiters.
Excellent. And you, Darren, your point of view on that?
Sure. Magnus, I'm glad to hear that you're removing names off the CV. We have 2 clients that request that, which I think, I want to applaud them, because there's not so many that do that. I mean, I remember when, it wasn't illegal to put the age on the CV. And of course, nobody would put their age on the CV. And Magnus, you'll laugh as well, because everybody uses a photograph on their CV when they send it to us. And of course, it's a big no-no, because there will be hiring managers and HR and recruiters that will have that unconscious bias. So without the name, without the photo, without the age, it at least first impressions. I mean, let's face it, we could probably guess where somebody's from by their education. We can guess their age from the education, but at least the first impression, it gives a hiring manager or an HR or a recruiter to overcome that initial first impression bias. And I think Luxembourg in general, because there's been a shortage of candidates, as I mentioned earlier, they really have no choice but to embrace diversity, which is great. On the flip side, those, what is the selling point of certain organizations for candidates? And that is around this diversity, and not just the tick box, but also the inclusion. What is the culture of the organization? Is it open? Is it transparent for those minorities or even gender? And we know that's a good selling point to candidates. And I don't know whether you saw, there was a McKinsey, and I heard about this and researched it recently. It was a few years ago, not too many, a McKinsey report for 366 public companies, US, UK, Canada, Latin America. And they discovered that the top quartile that embraced gender parity was 15% better results than the rest of the population. And those that had ethnicity or race as a top quartile element, they increased their revenues by 35% than the rest of the companies. So, you know, it's not just about diversity just for the sake of diversity. It actually benefits the organization as a whole.
Exactly. Okay.
Makes sense.
And makes sense. And what you said made me think about the next topic I want to address. Talent acquisition, the diversity and inclusion sometimes can be a challenge, sometimes can be a blessing, as you have said, Darren. So how do you see that this challenge becoming a solution for this talent shortage, and also applying this in Luxembourg? How do you see this environment welcoming diversity talents in response to the challenge of the shortage of the market?
I'm not sure whether I understood the question.
Yes, so I will repeat. You said that talent acquisition could be either a challenge, diversity in talent acquisition could be either a challenge or a blessing, because it can also be the solution, if I understood right, for the shortage sometimes. So we go further and we find different people with different skills. How do you see yourself as this exactly, as this kind of solution happening here internally in Luxembourg?
Yeah, okay. So I think one element that is really helped most companies is what the Big Four have done in Luxembourg. So the Big Four, in comparison to other companies, are huge in Luxembourg. But of course, in other countries, they might not sound so huge. But we're talking about 2,000 plus employees in each of the Big Four. And they have done a great, let's say, branding for Luxembourg, because they have had to go internationally to bring in graduates, whether it be from Eastern Europe or even India. And they're very good at the work permit process. They're experts at it. And I'm sure they can, speed up the process. So what happens then is somebody comes into a Big Four, and traditionally they stay around for 3 years. They get these individuals that are relatively inexpensive for Luxembourg, but after 3 years, they discover that they could actually earn more money, and maybe the role within a Big Four isn't as interesting as they thought. So, I use the Big Four as they're a headhunting ground. We don't recruit for them, but they are a source ground. And what we find there is even the partners of these Big Four are okay with that, because not everybody, can move up to a partner. They need to, reduce a bit of their workforce and have that churn. It's expected in the Big Four. So I think, yeah, as long as the Big Four keep bringing these people in, sorting out the work permits for us, we take them out after 3 years and everybody's happy.
Indeed.
Thank you very, very much, Darren. I would like to circle back just a little bit regarding biases, because I see some remarks in the chat about people saying, yes, without a photo, what a great idea. Names can still mislead recruiters and hiring managers towards a certain nationality or a certain culture. Now, I know Jane does a lot of work around identifying and addressing biases within the recruitment process. Is there anything that you've seen particularly recurring over the past years, or is this something that you can say this is something that we've seen going on and it's still going very strong?
In terms of people finding ways to address bias and increase diversity, or what do you mean, Manola? Not sure I understand.
Are there any specific biases that you have been, let's say, traditionally addressing within the recruitment processes? Because we talked about race, we talked about age, we talked about gender, we talked about cultures.
Okay, interesting. Yes, I think so. And I think building, I've been listening with interest to what everybody has been saying, because I think there are the traditional biases here in South Africa as worldwide, in terms of the first impression bias that Darren mentioned, and that, you know, where Emily and Magnus and Miguel, you started off talking about how important it is to take somebody's photo off their CV. And I think that's amazing, Magnus, that companies are actually willing to take the names off. I think that's fantastic as well. And I know that, yeah, I mean, Darren, you said sometimes people still look at the education and try and figure out things from there. I think that's something that's my understanding is big in the UK and can sometimes be bigger in South Africa too, is bias around not just what you studied, but where you studied. So I think that's a bias that's definitely come up in CVs. Age has been, and people, I mean, in South Africa, we've had legislation to say that you don't and you shouldn't put personal information on your CV. So it's all about legislating diversity. So not just, you know, Darren, you were saying diversity for diversity's sake. And Magnus, you were saying holding to that policy. No, was it Miguel? Sorry. But I think in South Africa, it's legislated that we need to have more diversity. So we've had to address things like, how does somebody look? In my workshops where I address diversity with hiring managers, the things that they confess to the most are things that, I mean, I don't know, maybe you can relate. It's actually somebody's handshake. So how the person shakes their hand. So they say if the hand is straight on and firm, and most of the firmness is around the knuckles, they somehow unconsciously think that person will do the job well. If that one hand is on top of the other, no, that person's going to be too dominant. If it's underneath, they're going to be too submissive. If it's not a strong
it'll be an arm bump now. How do they do the...
Yeah, now it's like this, exactly. The foot.
And worse, it will be the way you wave on the webinar.
Yeah. And now it's virtual as well. I must say, I mean, one of my favorite stories, not because it's a good story, but it's because it's one that I think sinks home to a lot of people, is one manager came out of an interview and he said to the other manager, they confessed this in a workshop with me, they said, sure, you know, I don't think we can hire that person. Did you feel the limp handshake of that person? And the other manager said, oh, did you not notice that that person has a disability? So it was really kind of brought that home that here you are judging somebody's character based on how they shake your hand, when maybe that person has an even stronger character because they've had to live with a disability. So there's the handshake, there's the first impression, I think as Darren talked about, there's how someone dresses, and language. I think something that was quite predominant in South Africa, especially when legislation encouraged more diversity of recruitment, is the people who were preferred to be employed were the people who spoke English and articulated their words more clearly than other people. So I think where I've been addressing a lot of this with managers is saying, okay, does the competency that you're assessing in the interview really link to somebody's ability to do the job? Are they a good interview performer or are they a good job performer? And so I think that's really something that a lot of managers have to look at. And yeah, it's really good to get them to talk. You know, you were saying have those uncomfortable conversations, Magnus. It's really good to encourage those uncomfortable conversations. And we've been having them for a long time in South Africa, and I'm really glad for that. Because one thing that maybe is good about our culture is we are willing to talk about things and even, you know, laugh at our mistakes sometimes when they can be laughed at, when it is appropriate.
Thank you.
So does that answer?
I can just jump in with the handshake or anything where a hiring manager in particular isn't happy about it. One of the things that I've always responded with is something along the lines of, how often in the role that they're applying for do they shake hands?
There we go.
Are they a professional handshaking job? You know, it's a lot of things. Some people will say, you know, they seem a bit of an introvert, or they weren't really motivated in the role. And say, well, you know, this is an accountant. Excuse me if anybody's an accountant on it, but they don't need to be such an extrovert, you know, and that's, you know, all the time as I refer back to the job description to say, what are you hiring them for? Is it for handshaking?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's very
Yeah,
true.
I'm
And
an extrovert in that job.
yeah, and it's the same with video interviews now. Sometimes you will have feedback from managers. Oh yeah, but it was not very, the candidate was not very comfortable doing the video interview. But it's not easy. It's not, I mean, it's probably even more challenging than doing a face-to-face interview. So I
Exactly.
don't think it's fair to assess people on their ability to be comfortable with the video, because
Yeah.
some people get really camera shy, and it can penalize them because they will not perform as they would have face to face. And it's the same. It's like, but do you need a performer? Are you recruiting a show host, or what's the job? And
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
makes them think a bit. Yeah.
That's right. It's almost like when they say, they didn't perform well in the interview, but they've got the right skills. And of course, the next question is, well, how often do they interview in this role?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. Especially with the pre-recorded interviews, a lot of people are uncomfortable. And I think that can also open up a new avenue for buyers, not just the real-time face-to-face virtual interviews. I think what I have seen some companies do, which I think is helpful, is make sure that they equip each candidate with a very detailed explanation and practice time to be able to work with the platform that they will be interviewed on. Because otherwise, some person is used to Zoom, another one's used to Cisco WebEx, another one, so I think that's important.
And make them comfortable at the beginning of the interview. Like say, hey, we know it's not easy. Please don't worry. It's fine. You even have sometimes comments about, a candidate's house decoration. Oh, did you see that ugly painting in the background? And and it's very it's very sad to hear this. You're like, well, this person is bringing you in their home. They trust you with this. Why are you judging? So you can, maybe the solution is to always have a fake background.
I remember reading an article. It was last week, and it was an article with people sharing their experiences of being judged because of their backgrounds, or because of the fact that they were using backgrounds, or because they didn't have their camera on. And there are a couple of stories that really, touched me. One of them was a lady who said, I'm really sorry, I've been warned, I got an official warning because I do not use my camera during the meetings. But I have been going through the lockdown, and I am still caring for my dad who has dementia, and things can go unpredictable really quick. I cannot leave my camera on. And I was also not comfortable saying this, and I don't believe I should be expected to say this to justify whether my camera is on or off. I also have friends who have small kids. They share an apartment, quite a small apartment, with their partners who are also having meetings. And sometimes the only place where you can have a bit of quiet, where are very personal spaces, let's call them like that. And maybe having the camera on is not the best idea. Listening to the conversation, I got reminded of this amazing documentary I saw a few months back about the human DNA, and all the conversation around mutations and about ethics and about what is, mutatable. And that got me thinking that when you hire on a checklist, and when you hire based on competencies, and you're looking for some competencies, and you're hiring for culture fit, the hiring managers and the recruiters are to some extent the geneticists of an organization and of a society. So listening to the conversation where is so much ethics and so much accountability and ownership involved, for me personally, it's a huge positive sign that maybe COVID just highlighted conversations and pushed people to have some uncomfortable conversations.
I think, sorry, if I can just jump in. So I think it goes back to what Emily said in her first point about kind of looking at yourself internally before anything else. And I think that's such a big thing because I guess going back to the video interviews, one thing that we've I've certainly found myself doing, because we had to quickly shift to the whole kind of video interviewing situation as soon as the kind of pandemic started to really kind of take flight, is that we kind of signpost to clients initially from the get-go that, listen, this person is very, very good at what they do, and in our opinion will be a very good fit, but their circumstance in terms of where they live, they may be kind of sharing a house, like you say, with, I don't know, 7 or 8 other professionals, as you do in London, because property prices are ridiculous. So if you don't, I guess what we found is that if you signpost all the negatives that could arise during a video interview, they're kind of aware of them, and they cannot then hopefully use them to kind of judge the candidate away from the actual skill set itself. So whatever that may be, it might be that this person has already kind of told me they may be a bit uncomfortable doing a video interview, but that's not to say they're not right for the role, type of thing. So I think kind of signposting to both candidates and clients will certainly kind of help as we kind of, because I'm guessing that we're going to kind of stick with this with video interviews and things like that, because it is a lot more efficient anyway, to be honest. So that's the silver lining with COVID and whatnot. But yeah, I think kind of signposting it to clients and candidates will certainly kind of help remove those biases. And then again, going back to what Emily and Miguel said about kind of looking at yourself internally, if you are a hiring manager, you somehow have to kind of educate yourself to make sure that you are only hiring off the back of skill set. I think cultural fit is always a difficult one. And Emily and Miguel will be able to kind of probably explain that better than I can, because I am an external consultant. But I think in terms of skill set, you just want to be looking at skill set and nothing else in terms of background or how they're interviewing and things like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think something I've seen, Magnus, hearing what you're saying is has come up in training workshops. And again, maybe Emily and Miguel, being internal, will have experienced this with hiring managers. But it's been very interesting to say to managers in workshops, so you want to hire somebody for culture fit? Tell me, what is your culture? And it's really been interesting to see the different answers that I get from people who are part of the same organization.
Yes.
I even had an answer from one manager who I said, so what is the culture fit? You say this person is fit into the culture. What does that mean? And he said, you know, they've got to be able to walk the corridors. Walk the corridors. What is that? But so seldom do I see managers aligning culture to the company's values and being able to really define what those values are. I saw a comment in our chat box saying, okay, is gut feel now bias? But I think sometimes managers define culture by how their gut feel is when they interview someone. And it's not necessarily accurate. It's just their personal like or dislike of someone. So Miguel, Emily, what do you think?
Ladies first.
Yeah,
You want
Emily or Miguel, whoever feel more comfortable to answer.
I do have a remark concerning what Magnus said, but go on, Emily, if you wish.
Yeah, of course, you have to resist sometimes the feedback of hiring managers, because they can be very affirmative about their gut feeling and no, I don't see this person in my team and everything. I think that gut feeling is important. You can't really ignore your gut feeling. We are all, I mean, recruitment is not an exact science. So there is always a part of subjectivity and you shouldn't ignore it, but it should be put into perspective with other objective assessment criteria. So gut feeling cannot be used alone to make a decision on someone. And I think it's dangerous to only judge on your gut feeling. You have to go beyond it. And I think it's important to educate hiring managers. Some people have been doing a lot of recruitment for their teams and they do it well. Some other managers, it's new for them. Maybe they have been newly promoted, and it's important to train them on do's and don'ts and best practices and what are the risks you can or the mistakes you can make when you recruit. So it's important for us to share our experience with them and make sure that they have been properly trained before they actually face candidates.
I want to say something a little, just a very small remark concerning the last question, because I feel that I need to say it. And it's, in the end, if the candidate feels comfortable or not during the interview process, we all have a call to remember that that is our responsibility. And we are the ones who have to make that happens, and that person feels discharged from any consequence that he or she believes that is on his or her side due to the backgrounds. Okay.
Mhm.
And this connects with what I'm saying, especially on the culture questions, because what Jean was saying is, is he or she a fit to the culture? So when many of the managers don't even know what the culture is, or as if culture was just a snapshot thing and not a complex phenomenon that we need to understand in a longitudinal way that might happen in several different microspheres, even within the same company, and not like an overarching factor, right? So it's, is he or she, can he or she adapt to the culture when most of people don't even know? So linking it again with the responsibility that we have as people that work in selection and design selection and move candidates up the pipelines is, let's be responsible for ourselves. And if we don't even know that, and that is really not predictive of this candidate being good in the position or of the position that I do really have, take it away from the interview. Don't make someone pass through a question that does not necessarily is there. If you yourself don't understand it, if your manager don't understand it and you don't know it, then why are you going to ask this candidate about adapting to something or demonstrating instances of something that in the end we don't know? Now, with this, I'm not saying that culture does not exist or that there's this common set of practices does not exist, and that there's certainly certain kind of people that adapt better or not to certain environments. They do. And now here I connected with Magnus. Magnus was saying, well, maybe because you're an internal recruiter or a person working in selection internally, then you have it more difficult. I'm not so sure, because before, when I was working in the recruitment agency, it was very difficult to understand which kind of candidates would the final client in the end like. So in here, in my internal exercise, it's true. I have a little bit more responsibility of making sure that that person really fit the team, or that really did adapt to it. But in some, up to some point, I leave that culture every day myself, and I understand it, and I have the possibility of interacting in it. Let's say it's a little bit easier to apprehend. When you work externally and you have to reply to another client, unfortunately, we cannot manage saying, oh, the candidate had everything, but you know, the hiring manager from the company just didn't like him. And why? He was not a fit. So is it easier for, is it more difficult for us internally? I'm not so sure if it's easier or more difficult, but I'm pretty sure that there's difficulty in both kinds of recruitments. And in here, I leave it and I experience it. When I'm a recruiter externally, I think it's a little bit more difficult to gauge it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Miguel. I was listening to you, and something else popped up in my head, and it's a question that I revisit periodically, and it's also something that has been raised a lot going through COVID, and that also stands and is related to where HR stands as a function within the decision-making process inside a company. How much visibility and how much ownership do they have, more internally than externally, when there is a decision made regarding opening up a role? What kind of responsibilities you put in that new bucket, and also how much deviation freedom you have from your requirement checklist from the hiring manager. And I think that also speaks to how reactive versus proactive, all the way to being a strategic conversation partner, is HR. And here I believe if we do another tour of our panel, the standpoints from internal to external are quite different. Ideally, they are complementary to each other, but it also goes into how you do efficient and transparent expectations management to the hiring managers, to the candidates, and then to your own gut feeling and professionalism and your own qualitative and quantitative KPIs. So if we can if we can build on that, I would be really, really curious to hear your top of mind remarks regarding this.
I can go with this one. Yeah, it's interesting because as a recruiter, we prefer to have a direct conversation with the hiring manager. And in a way, we want to avoid HR. I always get my wrist slapped, of course, from HR when we do that. And the reason why we want to do that is because by the time the role and expectations are filtered through HR, we might not get all the information. But what I do recognize is where HR can play the role of when it's almost like I see it as a filter, the filtering of making sure that when it reaches the hiring manager, whether it's a profile CV, that they've been through the diversity check. Whereas when I'm liaising directly with the line manager, you know, I'm letting that individual have, you know, using their unconscious bias, where I think HR play a pivotal role in making sure that's sort of filtered out by the time it gets to them. Whether that is, you know, simple things like removing the name or removing a photo that might be on the CV. So by the time it gets to the line manager, they make an informed decision based on skills alone.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'm just being a bit mindful of time, so we can go through this question and then we get to slowly to wrap up and some Q&A. It's time flew too quickly by.
Wonderful. Yes, it means we are having interesting conversation and the conversation is flowing. Yeah. Could you maybe
jump in after Darren then, if we have little time. So Darren, I can totally relate to having my wrist slapped. I think that happened to me a number of times as well as a recruiter. But I think what I'm seeing in South Africa at the moment, and so again, I'm speaking from a trainer perspective. So where internal talent acquisition teams are needing to upskill is to move outside of that process-oriented box that they've been in. So typically our HR and recruiters internally have been more concerned with administration and process and being almost yes people to the hiring managers. And so their challenge is to become strategic business partners so that they would be the kind of people that external recruiters would want to liaise with, because they are proactive and they are future focused and they're driving the process and not reacting and holding it back with red tape. So I think that's so key. I think it's important that they learn things about strategic thinking, organizational design, and that it's not just that side of things, that not just the technical knowledge and skills. They also need to, of course, understand their organization, but they've got to grow from an emotionally intelligent perspective. Those internal recruiters here, a lot of them need to be able to grow in assertiveness, an ability to listen, ability to influence, ability to persuade, sales skills. So almost they need to get some of those qualities that an external recruiter would have to become somebody who adds more value from an internal perspective. So that's what I'm seeing the need as here, and that's where I'm working with teams here.
Well, I think that's why it's good as a recruiter to have the opportunity to work both externally and internally in your career. I've been lucky that I could do this. And I started first internally, then worked for a recruitment agency with some people who are attending here. And it's great because I could see the other end of the business. So now when I'm working with agencies, I know what they need from me. I know what that sometimes they are not treated very well by their clients. So I'm always very mindful to respect all agencies we are working with, agencies that we are not willing to work with, and to provide feedback on time, to be transparent, and be a partner, as you said. So I think when you've been lucky to have the experience on both sides, of the mirrors, and it makes it easier for you to put yourself in the external recruiter's shoes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. And there is anything from your experiences as a talent acquisition professional that you'd like to share with us regarding diversity and inclusion as well?
I think if I may, Bianca, actually the question that we had in mind was if anything from your personal experiences and from your personal background influenced your talent acquisition work.
Yes.
So if reading your bios, there is so much diversity there. How diversity and how diverse experiences from your own life help you in your talent acquisition role, make you more mindful of some aspects?
Yeah, well, for me, I spent a lot of time in the Nordics, and what I was pleased to see in the Nordics, they're ahead of anywhere else in the world with parity, in particular gender parity. And I read recently from the European Trade Confederation that in Luxembourg, it will take till 2027, it's only 7 years away, where we'll have gender parity on salaries. Yeah, compare that to Germany, 100 years, the way it's climbing. And here you go, for France, 1,000 years it will take to get gender parity on salaries. So I've been quite fortunate of working in countries that that have had that parity already, from anything from, fathers sharing the paternity leave, and we're talking, a real share, which then gives, I think, both the husband and the wife and the mother and father equal opportunities for promotions and things like that. So for me, I think it's been great to see what I think best in class of organizations with parity. And it would be great for a lot of other countries to look at their models and introduce them to their own countries as well.
Thank you, Darren.
I guess for me, from a personal perspective, so obviously, as you mentioned at the start, I'm coming from a background in professional football, so my whole life has been kind of geared around camaraderie, teamwork, and kind of working together to achieve a common goal. So when Jane and Emily just touch upon that kind of relationship piece between external and internal recruiters, I guess that's probably why I've enjoyed the job so much. So whenever I bring on a client, I want to kind of know as much as I can about the team. If I can speak to the line manager, great, as Darren said, and obviously anybody who does external recruitment knows that that is at times super important in order to actually kind of understand what would be the right fit for that particular individual. But I think that that's probably something that I've drawn upon, is that camaraderie, is that getting to know a team, if you like, with a common goal, whether it be one hire, whether it be kind of 5 or 6 hires. It's just that real kind of togetherness piece, if you like.
Thank you, Magnus. Jane.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. I think probably my biggest influencer is something similar to what Miguel was saying in terms of how we are responsible for how we make people feel as candidates. And I think something that I am very passionate about is that each person needs to feel respected. I got into a lot of trouble in my early years as a recruiter because I came from working for our church where I was a counselor, and I got into trouble for spending too much time with the people who wouldn't make us money until they saw that I started to be a top performer, and then they left me alone to build relationships with candidates and clients. But I think just growing up in South Africa and getting so angry about the unfairness and just just how wrong it was, and having very liberal parents who we were sometimes in situations where we might have been at risk because we were going against what the government said. But I think it just bred such strong empathy in me and such a strong sense of everyone needs to feel respected. Doesn't matter what background they come from, you have no right to treat somebody as less than you just for whatever reason. So mine's more of a personal journey.
Thank you very much. Emily.
Well, I would think that having lived in different countries on different continents, so having worked in Rwanda, in Kenya, it really gave me a different perspective on life and how to be fair on candidates. Each market has its own specificities on skills, and sometimes it was challenging to recruit in Rwanda, for instance. So I had to adapt and shift my expectations and focus on what was really important. For instance, recruiting in Rwanda for a telecom company, you would not find the perfect profiles, the people with the right experience, but you would have so many young, bright, smart, motivated people that you could bring in and train. And so I've always kept this, as was my early experiences as a recruiter. And I've always kept in mind this strategy, and I'm always looking for companies who are willing to embark on this type of journey with me, to give a chance to smart people with the right attitude, because other skills you can learn, but the attitude, it's really within yourself.
Thank you very much, Emily. Miguel, how about you?
So I think that things that have shaped my position in front of diversity, it's first of all my education and my background, but also the exposure that you can have to several other cultures. But as of today, I believe that it is actually being a migrant where I'm working for. So I think it would be hypocrite to practice anything related to discrimination when you yourself are someone who does not pertain to the majority, right? And in terms of the experience, I have had many fights in recruitment or in selection processes, but I always recall one that, well, it marked me particularly. I don't know why, but that one marked me. And it was fighting for a candidate who was going to work internally, not in here, in a previous employer. And this candidate was sincere enough to indicate in their selection process that he had a condition, a medical condition, a sexually transmittable disease, right? And I remember myself fighting even with the management of the company in order to get this person in, because he or she had the competencies and the skills that were necessary to come in. Unfortunately, I didn't win the war, but I think that was one of the experiences that opened my eyes as wide as much in order to see how capital is our role in what diversity means.
Thank you, Miguel. So just before Bianca will bring two very short questions from the chat, let's do a quick round again with all the speakers, and what is your absolute key message for the audience today? Like very, very short. We're a few minutes towards the end. Unfortunately, time flew by. So just I will do the round again, but I will start with Miguel counterclockwise. So your key message, a few seconds, what you want the audience to take with them from this conversation.
Thank you, Minola. What I would like people to take away is the fact that you need to assess where does any kind of discrimination comes from in yourself. Most of the times it's from fear. If you really get to assess that and you expose yourself to those things, you will see that diversity is just of course, there's structural things and social things and historical things happening around the phenomenon, but the change comes with us. As I said, it is our responsibility to do so, and it is your responsibility to expose yourself to diverse backgrounds and conditions.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Emily?
Never assume, always ask. So to make sure that communication is flowing, always ask the questions. Don't be shy to ask twice if it's not clear. So at least you make sure that you communicate properly.
Thank you very much. Never assume, always ask. Darren?
Yeah, mine's probably super practical. If any of you can influence your company's HR departments, hiring managers, to look at the information that they're receiving from potential employees, and of course it's usually the CV. So regardless of whether it's legislation or not, remove the photo, remove the name. And of course, age is already in legislation, but thinking about what are the things that could create some bias with the line manager when they look at that CV. remove it before it gets to them.
Thank you. Magnus.
Yeah, so my point would be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. I think in the space that we're in, I think you can either lead and drive some positive change, or you can at least kind of join someone on a journey to make positive change.
Thank you. And Jane.
Thanks, Manola. I think my message would be to listen to people in an interview with respect and curiosity. Draw out their stories, because I think stories break down bias when you really get to know people, so that you can let people leave you feeling more respected and more courageous than when they walked in, because I think that impacts more than just your organization. That impacts the society that they walk back into.
Thank you very, very much. I'm really, really trying to see if we have time, just a very, very short reminder that we will be having future events. Diversity and inclusion will be an underlying reality of all our conversation, and we acknowledge the reality of our lives and what enriches our professional and personal lives. Follow us on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out. Please feel free to reach out and raise any topic that you feel particularly passionate about. If you don't see that topic in our event, raise it and we can build an event together. Always happy to hear from you, whether it's a LinkedIn, email, whatever it is, reach out. So let's try and see if we can have one question, Bianca, if you can just raise one quick question.
Yes. So we have two questions, but I'll go just for one. Yelena, that has asked it a long time ago. Some companies are going as far as assessing candidates on whether they have similar set of values to that of the team or company. I find it very powerful tool, which may help attracting good fit for both sides. Do you see this trend in your fields?
I can start maybe. I think it's good to assess if a candidate adheres to your values, but it can also be dangerous because it can kill the innovation and the creativity. If you always hire the same type of people, then they will think alike. And for some roles, I'm thinking of maybe marketing or research and development. It can be dangerous. So it's handled with care, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say something similar. Yeah, if you're brave enough to hire people that disagree with you, you'll get a better outcome as a team. Respectfully disagree with you and challenge you.
Minola, do you think we have space for just one more question?
Well, let's give it a try. And in case we do disappear, then a huge thank you to everybody. It's been a pleasure. Just watch out for future Hacking HR Luxembourg and Friends events. It's always nice to have the and Friends. And let's try for one question, Bianca.
So even though Luxembourg is really diverse, it's from Patricia, an international environment, we have a huge domination of native French in the field, and we notice a preference to hire more French native speakers when leadership doesn't require that or would rather have English speaker. How to improve that in the recruitment field? How to turn Luxembourg really international and open to everyone?
Okay, I go again. It's really interesting because, yes, sometimes you have some clients when you are an external recruiter who really insist on languages when it's not always necessary. I think as an internal recruiter now, what I can say is I try to challenge hiring managers on languages. I always ask them, oh, well, okay, do you really need all 3 languages fluent? Which one is really key? Because working language is English. Can we go for people who only speak English? And I have to say that in my current company, we don't really have this challenge. They're flexible. I mean, as long as you speak English, then you're good to go. So it's easier on this side. But I remember in working in an agency that it's sometimes very, very tricky.
Yeah, but I think in particular for those, let's say, French organizations that are used to communicating in French and they don't have, international English as a second language communication in the company, it's very difficult for somebody that isn't French to sit in that environment where they can't actually communicate with their colleagues. I think, one of the first things I did when I got to Luxembourg, and I think this is a phrase that you'd use in every language, which is "Kan ik een bier krijgen van alsjeblieft," which basically means "Can I have a beer, please?" And I learned that, you need that in every language. So you've got to take that away as what phrases can you use as just colloquial phrases. And I think then, if the language is really, really necessary to do your role.
Thank you, Darren.
You haven't learned how can I have a gin, please, Darren?
Yes.
Gyms and ice cream for everybody after the event.
Yeah,
Minola and Darren will sponsor.
Yeah. Miguel, would you like to say something along the lines of how can we really make Luxembourg intentionally inclusive? I can feel some answers bubbling from you.
I was just thinking in this worst article that came out like 1 week ago about French speaker that complains about English speaker that only speaks English, only speaks French. So it was like really funny about the situation because you see it every now and then. And look, it's again, I think we have to have an active role, and that should lead us to, as Emily was saying, we have to challenge the people involved in the selection processes. Nevertheless, maybe I'm the only one who has found the situation that there's people that simply won't change the biases that you have, right? And we still need to do something on that. So what has worked in my experience has been letting the wave fall by itself. When you demonstrate that there can be candidates that do not necessarily have the perfect French that you're looking for and still can make the job in a very proficient way, then that's what makes some people change their positions. In my case, it's not with French, it's with Japanese, because I work for a Japanese company. But I think it's more or less the exact same situation. And there is where our work is. You need to demonstrate, look, do you really need it? No, then probably there's more things that you have to learn than that candidate a language.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to all our speakers, Jane, Magnus, Darren, Emily, and Miguel. Thank you, Bianca. It's been a pleasure as always. Just giving you a heads up, Luxembourg chapter has these events the same time slot every third Wednesday. So you can save it in your calendars. Next up is October the 28th, which with Agile HR. We are going for a myth bust on Agile HR. Then with Patricia, we're also putting together a diversity and inclusion masterclass, a follow-up on cultural competence masterclass. And we are also aiming for a thank goodness 2020 is over sometime in December. And that will be an open event. Everybody is welcome. It will be, hop on, hop off. Just make sure you bring something orange, which is our color. It can be anything from Aperol Spritz to Swatch or, party goggles. Always, always a pleasure spending time with you. Please reach out. Become a hacker, become a friend, and become someone who drives a little bit of change around you. And, one change at a time and one day at a time. And we will be hearing from each other with happy news, with good news, and with whatever news we feel like sharing. So thank you so very much. Have a lovely evening.